Ladies and gentlemen, Nikon Ambassador Jide Alakija. Give me my hug.
Oh, yes.
I had to go on my tippy toes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mike. Hello, everyone. I am Jide Alakija. I am obviously a wedding portrait and street photographer as well. So, as the title says, I'm going to talk to you about my journey as a street, wedding, and portrait photographer. And a lot of it has to do with this whole thing about the unexpected. Um, this is literally my approach whenever I'm shooting weddings. Literally trying to look for something unique, something different, because there's always something unexpected, because the unexpected is pretty much where everything is at. And also as a street photographer, and in fact, most of my approach in wedding photography has actually been inspired by street photography, just because you just do not have any control over anything, right? The subject, the light, the mood, anything at all, even how your camera reacts sometimes to every single moment. You have to prepare yourself for every single thing that's happening. So really, the main thing is always making sure that you're prepared, right? Making sure that your timing is right, making sure that you are in the moment for you to get the particular shot. For instance, now this is a picture I took in Zanzibar, and there were these kids jumping into the lake. And I just quickly kind of took a sort of a stance and crouched in a position that would make the image even more graceful to show the dynamic nature of what's actually happening. It's the same thing that also happens when I'm in a wedding. Looking for things that, they're pretty standard. The bouquet toss, for instance. Now, you see that all the time when you go into a wedding. But it's more than that. I'm looking for the thing that that you don't sort of expect, if that makes sense. So in this particular shot, my concentration is actually more on the reactions of the ladies over here, because it's their reactions that really will make the shot itself, capturing that decisive moment. I think this image just defines what unexpected really is all about, right? Here was actually, I think this couple got married on Christmas Eve, and in New York, we have some really, really beautiful buildings in different places. This particular couple wanted to do a photograph in front of the church. I had this great idea of putting them in the archway of the door. And then this gentleman just decided to just walk past in front of me. Very, very New York thing to do. And there's nothing more unexpected about this. It's about embracing these things. So, I want to sort of share with you how this has kind of developed my own eye as a photographer and how I've developed my own signature through that way. It's through the unexpected that I've actually become who I am today, right? So this first section, we're going to talk about how we embrace the unexpected. This was actually in Turkey. And you can almost say that this sign was waiting for me when we were walking down the street to take this photo, right? As some of you, if you've ever been to Europe, the one-way sign has a blue background and a white arrow, and it just happened that the bride and groom were wearing pretty much the same color. So just by using the environment to actually create something that's quite, connected, was one way we could actually create such a good portrait out of that. This particular environment there was nothing really amazing in this particular shot. People love BTSs, so I decided to put some BTSs in here. My couple here were not best pleased when I told them that they were going to go into the bushes and actually have this portrait taken of them. But the point was I wanted to demonstrate something about their own embrace, something that they actually inspired me of, which is they're a very intimate couple, really private. I just thought it would be quite interesting to kind of demonstrate that and show that in their, in their own embrace, right? So it's about, sometimes you just don't have what you want, but you use what you have to create what you can. This is actually one of the shoots that we did for the Nikon Z8 campaign. And one of the things that Nikon does is they challenge you. They give you these really, really cool assignments. And one of them was, hey, let's try and create something wedding-y, right? And at the time, I thought, I've got to try something interesting here. What do I have? I have some really nice light, and I have a really beautiful bride. And that's pretty much it. And it looked very, very standard. But just by kind of creating some sort of frame around the pose, we're actually able to create something with pretty much nothing. And not all the times, and I'm sure a lot of wedding photographers can relate to this, you have to create magic in an environment that isn't great, right? We had lots of snow. It was like 25 degrees or something like that. At the same time, we want to create something that's quite dynamic. So I have my assistant who's helping me hold the lighting. And also, I have another assistant helping me hold her veil. And we're able to sort of create something that's somewhat elegant, that doesn't sort of depict the nastiness of the conditions that we're working with. So just kind of embracing your environment and digging deep to find something, the unexpected, is important. And also when we're shooting the reception sometimes, I call this the iPhone photo because it was shot on an iPhone. But this is literally what we have to work with. The bride and groom obviously spent a lot of money on their flowers, the candles, and all the different things. And this particular shot looks rather flat. It's not something that is rather inspiring. Of course, it has me in it, which is probably the reason. But I'm choosing a different perspective. Not only am I changing that perspective, I'm also adding some off-camera lighting to make it look interesting. And also trying to capture some sort of mood in that, right? So you have the elements of the wedding, the orchids, the candles, and the expression on the groomsman's face to kind of give you the full story. I shot this wedding where there was nothing happening when we were shooting the groom's prep until this particular moment happened. The groom was about to do a portrait. He had very, very dry ankles. The best man on the right was very displeased with the fact that I was taking a portrait of his favorite friend with dry ankles, and they decided, no, we got to make sure his ankles are right. They sat him down and started rubbing his feet with lotion. And I thought this was probably the best moment that depicted who these people were. It wasn't something I planned. It was something that happened at the time. All right, so let's go into the next section where we sort of challenge the idea of taking photographs of unique moments, right? When I started taking photographs abroad, I'm Nigerian by background, and I had to photograph a wedding in Nigeria. This is literally what a Nigerian wedding looks like in Nigeria. You have a whole host of photographers, a whole host of videographers, and I was fighting and struggling with a lot of them. And I just thought, why don't I try something different, try a different perspective? And from that, I've tried different variations of this. This is a very standard shot. The makeup artist is getting her picture of the bride after she's done her makeup, and I'm not going to compete with these guys. They probably have gear that's better than mine. So I decided, let me tell a different story from a different perspective as well. And from that, I've evolved that whole idea into showing different stories in different ways. The first kiss is something we all look forward to. But again, let's try a different spin on that. Everybody's taking photographs with their phones these days. Why don't we include them into the story? So this particular moment, and this is a moment which wasn't planned as well, was something that was captured at that time. Again, the build-up to the kiss is sometimes more, what's the word? The build-up in itself is actually has a lot more meat, there's more to look forward to than the actual moment itself. And it's something I'm always looking forward to. The groom was very, very nervous here. And of course, when it was the time to give this kiss, he brought out the mouth freshener, and look at the reaction on her face. She definitely approves. The bride and groom had just had a very, very, very exhausting ceremony. They ran into the car, sat down, and the bride just took a gaze, looked out at her sister, and the groom just grabbed her hand and gave her a kiss. This is not a planned moment, but you've got to be prepared for these things. And it's something that I always look forward to. Like I said, we're trying to sort of create a different spin on what is expected or what is unexpected. And that's kind of become my theme now. Whenever I'm looking to take portraits or looking to take pictures, how can I create something that is not what you kind of expect? So these are really good friends of mine. The bride is a wedding planner. The groom is a DJ. And I asked him to bring his DJ deck because he thought, oh, maybe we could do something with that. And we just kept on trying to figure some things out. And I thought, oh, why don't you just put your hands on the deck? So I have some iteration of what the wedding ring looks like. And then I could kind of create, some sort of reflection. So this is like the deck itself spinning, and have a nice video light on their faces. Taking that one step forward, most of the times you have the bride in the front and you have the groom at the back, and I thought, okay, let me try a different spin with that, and then built up an idea. I like to sort of create frames. So I have her sort of peeking through his shoulder to create some sort of intimate moment, and then having his expression in the foreground, creating something somewhat intimate. We talk about light. Everything's all about light. But also, let's talk about shadows too. Shadows also give you some power. Let's reverse things a bit. In New York City, we have this beautiful building called the Oculus, and a really nice shadow is always cast sort of around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it makes some really, really interesting shadows. And I just thought, why don't we sort of use that and then create some really nice pose? Reversing everything again, moving away from the actual subject to the actual shadows themselves, and creating something that gives you some sort of extension of the full story without having to actually see the actual person themselves and the person who you're actually with. Creating unity by just joining the heads, joining the different features in there, and then framing them as well. Just using different ideas to kind of create a different not misconception, but a different conception on things. That's this guy over there. And again, and then just really, the inspiration behind this is really just, like I said, you always have some sort of idea of things, how things are being done. Let's try and reverse that and put a spin on it. Create, we always talk about how the bride always has to be posed to kind of show some shapes and things like that. We can also do that with the guys too. And of course, I had a really good subject over here. If you ever need some posing tips, you can get that from him. But Virgil did some really, really good posing over here, and at the same time, his beautiful wife kind of complements that. Unity. Creating really good, connections through different facial connections. You can take different elements of your subject to create a really, really good idea of what the story is all about. Half the time, whenever we're shooting in certain spaces, we're lost for ideas. It has to look beautiful. But sometimes the beauty is actually in what it is that you're looking at. All right, so let's move to the next step. How we develop our eye using things like shape, juxtapositions, light, and all these things. So the first thing, I was in a really lovely town in India called Jodhpur. It's where the Blue City is. And I just happened to stumble on a wedding. I was on one of my street photography trips, and I happened to stumble on a wedding where they were literally on the street having the wedding. And I saw these three ladies, and somehow I could kind of see I don't know if you can see a certain spiral, a Fibonacci spiral. Do you guys know anything about the Fibonacci spiral? Yeah? And just kind of thought we could kind of create something with that. And again, because it's a street shot, you can't actually plan any of these things. I had the privilege of going to Lalibela in Ethiopia to go visit some of the beautiful old churches. One of the churches holds the 10 Commandments. And I saw one of the parishioners there at the corner praying, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And it just happened to be next to this painting of the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus, creating some sort of connection that shows some relationship between devotion of the devotion of the actual parishioner himself. So I somehow extended that to a wedding. I always joke about this, but white Jesus, and the couple lighting up a candle. The candle represents unity, and you can see that he's kind of put his hand on his chest, and you have that same light. So there's a certain connection that you can kind of create with these little objects. Another street shoot in Cuba. I had a really cool chat with this gentleman here who was, and he told me this story himself, he was one of the trumpet players for a really famous artist in Nigeria by the name of Fela Kuti back in the 70s. And that's actually what got us talking. And through that, I started taking photographs of him as he was talking. And I noticed that cast of light on his cheek. And just through that, because I love framing, love using light and all these different things, we were able to create this whole thing. Because you know he's a trumpet player, but there's a really, really good use of that light. And that's kind of led me into this whole idea of using Shatner lighting, right? For those of you who are wondering, Shatner lighting is the lighting that William Shatner, it was in the Star Trek movies, William Shatner was famous for having this glow of light on his face. And they kind of, in Hollywood, started to call it Shatner lighting. So I started to use it a lot. Every time the sun's setting, I would have different people sort of pose in that. Now here we have this bride. The wedding is all about the bride. We all know that. So I just thought, why don't we create a really strong portrait using that same sort of lighting as well? Extending that to an engagement shoot as well. Against a really rough wall, sun was setting, and you had some really nice dapple light. So I put the couple in that particular light to do the same sort of thing. It shows a softness, but at the same time, some sort of intimacy, because it's also warm as well. Yeah, but it also happened to be on the ring as well, which was, that took a bit of time to kind of position his head. You can imagine, like, every time I was posing him, it was like, just keep moving a bit to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right, just to get that light right there. Sometimes I use the light to sort of show shapes. Whenever I see shape in lighting, I try and shape the pose to that particular lighting. So in Central Park, we have this really nice sort of arch through one of the arches. We had this really nice light that created this really beautiful triangle. And it just happened that we could create the same triangle just based, on the posing and things like that. So it's just some of these ideas just sort of come to you where you're thinking, we can actually create something really, really cool with that. Unexpectedly, when I was walking in Seoul, I don't know if you can tell, but this guy looks just like that guy over there. And I wish I had some lady there who was just walking in. But anyway, the point is, and I think this would have paired well with the first photo of the guy wearing the Santa clothing. But the point is, sometimes things just kind of work out for you, right? You just don't expect them to be there. And sometimes you get juxtapositions that are sort of complete opposite. So you have a really colorful backdrop or a very intimate moment and a very, very expressive couple who are dressed in a very, very dull, there's some juxtapositions in that regard. They're just things that I've started working with. Coming back to the whole idea of shadows and light with couples, getting someone who is really calm to be somewhat expressive and someone who is always expressive to be somewhat calm, but only showing that in their shapes. And these shapes are what silhouettes are all about, right? Whenever you have some really beautiful light, you can always create some really beautiful shapes whenever you can. So for instance, now we have a really beautiful couple, really interesting figure that presented itself at the reception, and some really beautiful sunset. Really nice shape with her hands, with the veil, and almost some really good leading lines. All right, let's talk about luck, because this is something that you need a lot of when you're shooting a wedding and something that you're shooting from, and when you're shooting on the streets as well. The thing about luck is, as a photographer, is you're always going to be lucky, but it's about being prepared when that luck presents itself. So for instance, now I overheard the bride and the bridesmaids having this really cool chatter. And instead of focusing on the bride walking down the aisle, based on the conversations that they were having, I got a sense that there's going to be a reaction to her walking down the aisle. Because the bride, they hadn't seen the bride in her dress when she was getting ready. But then again, choosing your luck in the sense that you're trying to decide, do I capture the bride walking down the aisle or do I capture this particular moment? Which is more important to you? And also when I'm working down the streets, whenever I see a moment where I do get lucky, I try my best to get as much of that luck as possible. It's very intimidating to just put your camera really, really close to a whole bunch of people washing their clothes, and a really expensive camera at that, washing their clothes in a very, very dirty river. But it just seemed like the sort of thing that I needed to capture at that particular time. Here we have a bunch of bridesmaids who are really unhappy, really sad, and one bridesmaid who's probably unhappy, probably jealous, God knows. But it's about utilizing that luck, because a moment later we would have missed that. That bridesmaid might have looked at me, things might look a bit different. You've got to be sort of ready, prepare yourself for that. Oh, this time when I was photographing this statue in New York City, we had a bunch of statues of dogs carrying cameras. And as I was taking that photograph, Lady Luck presented herself. A poodle just walked by in front of the camera. Using that same inspiration, here a bride and groom being hoisted on the dance floor, I'm using the same ideas that I picked up from my street photography as well, framing with different elements wherever I can. Juxtapositions again. This was a picture that just seemed to catch my eye in terms of the reaction of what it actually is. But then somehow this lady just showed up, and I thought, oh my God, that is rather haunting. You can see a certain connection between both, or maybe you can. Or even on the wedding day itself, as I asked 3 bridesmaids to come out, and then I now noticed that we had 3 budgies in the cage, creating some sort of connection with that, right? So sometimes you start asking yourself, am I always lucky, or do I just make sure that I'm always there when things themselves happen? You've got to keep your eyes open. On the street shoot as well, things just kind of line up themselves. So someone asked me, like, how did you get everything to line up like that? Taking a lot of photos. You don't just take one photo. You just keep shooting it till something happens. And that's the same thing that happened here. The bride has got that beautiful light on her while everyone is kind of doing their own thing. As you can tell, I love working with layers and having layers in my photographs. All right, let's talk about gear and how my gear has evolved with my own approach. One of the beautiful things I love so much about using my Nikon gear is the flip screen, the ability to actually take some really, really good photos. You know, the camera is very responsive. But it's just having a camera that is very reliable, gives you texture images with a composition that you want. I mean, that's a game changer for me. But then now extending that to lighting. I don't know how many people use a lot of available lighting. I used to use a lot of strobes when I was shooting, but the cameras have become so good in terms of dynamic range now and ISO, you can actually now start using things like that. Oh, that's the wrong frame. And now I'm using a lot more wide-angle, super wide-angle lenses, just to highlight things like the staircase here, the dress here, and then you have that beautiful light. Off-camera flash, using a lot more off-camera flash in sort of telling more stories and compelling stories. This particular shot was taken because a bride asked me on the day, I have a gold dance floor and a chandelier. She told me this specifically, and I need you to make a really amazing photograph out of it. So I had to get a ladder, much to the discomfort of the particular hotel where I was working at, to get this shot. And we have off-camera flash in different directions, just to make sure we got the reflection and to get that chandelier as well. Another thing that I've been using a lot recently is the remote shooting, using that really nice app called SnapBridge. It's helped a lot in my street photography. So whenever I'm working in certain environments, this is in Haiti. Haiti is one of the most camera-shy cities and countries I've ever worked in. A lot of people don't like you taking photographs with your camera. So what I do now is I put the camera on my hip and literally shoot from the hip with the SnapBridge software, and you can actually literally see what the camera is seeing on your hip. So people don't really think that you're taking photographs of them, but this is literally what that is about. And so I've used that same technique here in New York City. There's something quite haunting about this picture, but it really does depict the types of people you have in New York. You have a very noisy subway car, and some people react in some way, and some people are so oblivious to it. Another market scene, the same sort of thing, shooting from the hip. But what I love particularly about this particular shot is just how the colors all come together to tell its own story. But there is no way I would have been able to take this same shot, sort of holding the camera in that regard. On the dance floor, my compositions have become so much better because of the fact that you have a better, the flip screen on the camera is so much better at capturing these things. I'm able to sort of capture little things like the handkerchief, the lighting, not clipping the arms and clipping the fingers and things like that. Some people's sorrows are some other people's joys. This shot was actually taken using a remote trigger on a particular camera. So I was taking, this is a particular wedding where you are not allowed to take photos in the front of the church. But what I actually did was just put the camera in the front on top of the tripod, and I was triggering it all from my phone. Anyway, this is my last slide. Thank you so much. I hope you guys will embrace the unexpected and enjoy the rest of the conference or the expo.